There were no buildings here, no roads, no electricity, no water system, just a few trees around Foot Lake. Wide expanses of prairie grass, some so tall a horse and rider could hide in it, and some large sloughs, which ran southward from what was to be Willmar's business district. The first resident of what was to become the Willmar we know today was a fur trader named A.S. Leiby, who built a log cabin on the shore of what was to become Foot Lake, just about where Ella Avenue meets 7th Street Northwest right now. Leiby had moved from St. Cloud by way of New London on the strength of a rumor that the St. Paul and Pacific Railway was going to lay tracks through what is now Willmar, while the tracks were still being laid several miles east of this location. He expanded his fur trading post to include some general merchandise, and later it also housed the first post office in this area. But Leiby had to move his store 2 blocks south, so it would be in the new town of Willmar if he wanted to continue as postmaster. This locomotive pulled the first train into Willmar on New Year's Eve Day, 1869. It was almost an accident. The train was scheduled to complete its run at Litchfield, but the crew had heard that the tracks were in as far as Willmar, so they took a chance and made it. That train wasn't here very long before it headed back for St. Paul, and no other trains came here during the rest of the winter. This is one of the oldest business buildings in our city. Several businessmen came here just before and after the railroad did, and by the early 1870s, a pretty respectable business district was in the making, even though what was here was still in the rough frontier community stage. The new town grew rapidly because it had been chosen as a division point on the railroad. Settlers felt that that would be a great advantage, and consequently, it was later chosen as the seat of the new Candy-Ojai County, which is just as old as Willmar. Within 15 years, the town's population had grown from less than a dozen people to 1,500, and the business district was large enough and diverse enough to serve an ever-increasing trade area. There were grocery stores standing next to fur trading posts, butcher shops, dry goods stores, general merchandise businesses, a drugstore, a photographer, a blacksmith shop, hotels, millinery shops, furniture stores, a jeweler, and a pool hall. In its first issue in 1885, the Willmar Argus newspaper also reported that the growing town could boast 7 churches, 5 secret societies, 2 public schools with 6 teachers, and 1 private college called the Willmar Seminary, with 5 professors and 100 students. The Argus also mentioned a dentist, barber shops, shoe stores, an opera house, a saddlery, flour mills, a grain elevator, a couple of both banks, and newspapers. Willmar could boast home mail delivery, a municipal power system, and railroad facilities, which were being enlarged almost monthly. During the first 30 years of its existence, our town had grown to a population of over 3,000. Willmar's new power plant provided some fireworks when it was flattened by an explosion in 1901. The village president, we call them mayors now, had entertained guests at his home, and he'd called the power plant to have the street lights turned on so his guests could make their way home. The lights went on for a few minutes, then the blast wiped them out. Miraculously, no one was seriously hurt, although the force of the explosion was powerful enough to blow a 300-pound part of one of the plant's boilers to the courthouse lawn, 2 blocks away. Willmar businessman David N. Tallman had been negotiating with Andrew Carnegie for a library grant for several years. In 1903, this library became a reality and served the community well for more than a half-century, until usage demand outgrew the facility. A new high school was built in 1905, and the Bethesda Orphans Home was built at Eagle Lake the same year. Later, it became an old folks' home. What is now the Willmar Regional Treatment Center was originally the Paul Willmar Farm. Paul's father, Leon, for whom our town was named, represented the European holders of the railroad's bonds. so he felt he could ask the road's officials to find a place where his son could farm. Paul was an officer in the army of the Emperor Maximilian of Mexico. Willmar Sr. was sure the emperor would lose and wanted his son out of harm's way before that happened. Young Willmar came here in 1870 and proved to be a good neighbor. He left in 1880 to return to his native Belgium, and there's no record of anyone here ever hearing from him again. After Paul Willmar left, Peter J. Dale bought the farm and continued to make improvements until he in turn sold it to Willmar businessman David N. Tolman, who also continued to develop it. It had become a showplace. Tolman sold it to the state of Minnesota early in this century for a hospital for inebriates, which opened in 1908. The purchase of the land and the construction of the hospital were financed by a tax on whiskey. Willmar kept growing. A new post office was built on the corner of 4th Street West and Litchfield Avenue in 1912 and served the community well for more than a half century until it was replaced by the present one. Horseless carriages were coming on the market and were proving so popular that they were creating an almost insatiable demand for new and better roads. The convenience of the new motor cars also opened opportunities for industries to build their plants or other facilities on the outskirts of town. As the community grew, so did the business district. Willmar quickly became a prime market center, serving an ever-increasing trade area. Much of Willmar's growth may be attributed to the railroad. Its main line lay in the heart of the town. And it wasn't long before branch lines were completed from Willmar to Sioux Falls and Sioux City, and from Willmar to Duluth. At one time, as many as 32 passenger trains stopped in Willmar every business day of the week. By 1922, Willmar's population had grown to more than 6,600, and the city directory listed 113 categories of businesses, ranging from cigar makers to music teachers, and from harness shops to tanneries, operating here. It also listed 22 secret societies, including the Sons of Norway Lodge and the Green Lake Country Club. Our town could boast of 6 public schools. Central School, the high school, and the junior high were all located where the central office building is now. Lafayette was in its present location, and Garfield and Lincoln were operating, but not where they are now. We had 2 hospitals, sometimes 3, and we also had 11 grocery stores, 4 meat markets, 5 music teachers, and 3 newspapers. But we'd lost the Willmar Seminary, which had closed its doors in 1919. Willmar just kept growing. In 1922, J.C. Penney Company became the first of the dreaded chain stores to come to town. Its leading opponent admitted, shortly after the opening, that it really was good for business. There was a big railroad strike in 1922 when strikers stopped all trains in Willmar, but permitted the United States mail trains to go on their way. The Lakeland Hotel was built. The Tribune became a daily newspaper, and gas service came to town. Weary River was the first talking motion picture shown here. Talkies became so popular that all movies were banned on Sundays for several years. By 1930, more than 6,000 people called Willmar home, and a golf club had been built on the shores of Foot Lake. And crime came to town. The Bank of Willmar was robbed in spite of a barrage of bullets laid down by local militiamen. And Ruby Haug, the live-in babysitter at the Episcopal Rectory, was murdered by a jealous boyfriend. The First Street Bridge was built over the railroad tracks even after it had collapsed in the middle of construction, only to appear in Robert J. Ripley's syndicated newspaper feature, Believe It or Not, as the bridge that leads to nowhere because the state didn't have the money to build the highway to it. Willmar's War Memorial Auditorium, now on the National Register of Historic Places, was completed in 1937. It had been constructed under one of President Franklin Roosevelt's alphabet soup programs, which had been designed to bring the country out of its massive Depression slump. Rice Memorial Hospital was completed the same year as the auditorium. This was a gift to the city of Willmar by soldier of fortune Colonel Cushman Rice in memory of his parents. Radio station KWLM came to town in 1940, just a year before World War II set everything but the war effort aside. Willmarites participated in scrap drives, bond drives, victory gardens, and sent many young people to become part of the fighting forces. There was a big celebration when the war was finally over, just as there had been at the end of World War I. And then, the whole country tried to capture normalcy just as hard as it had tried to end the war in a hurry. The Coffee Fest was an annual festival for many years, spurred into existence by the town's coffee drinking capacity, which made it the coffee drinking capital of the United States. More industry came to town as a result of a great deal of planning done by a local committee which had been looking ahead to the end of the war. Rice Hospital expanded to more than 100 beds. Bethesda Homes opened a nursing home in town. The forerunner to Jenny O opened a plant in Willmar, which produced Turking turkey logs. The Veterans Memorial Parkway had been built from the foot of the First Street Bridge out to what was then the Willmar State Hospital. And we finally got dial phones. By the mid-1950s, Willmar's population had reached 9,500, and we had 17 churches, 32 garages and filling stations, which led to the popular comment that Willmar was the city with a church or service station on every corner. Willmar's city directory about that time listed 292 different types of businesses, ranging from 2 banks to 4 pool halls. It did not list all the dry town's bootleggers. There were so many of them that people said they had to wear some type of identification so they wouldn't waste time trying to sell to each other. Then came the biggest period of civic growth in the past 75 years. Drive-in restaurants, drive-in theaters, Skylark Center, our first shopping mall, which was followed in a few years by Candy Mall. A bypass was built around downtown Willmar to relieve the congestion created by trucks unloading on a 2-lane federal highway. The Jaycees conducted their Operation Snowflake to help everyone beat the winter blahs for several years. And the Air Force built a radar base north of town, which eventually became Willmar Community College and Vo-Tech School. Willmar's first community theater, The Barn, became a reality in 1960. Our town had grown to 10,417 people and had added a few more churches. The industrial park was filling rapidly, and Willmar's first off-sale liquor license in 50 years were issued. From that time on, our city's growth has been continuous, and civic improvements and growth have kept pace until now we are a city with over 400 types of businesses. Our first 2 courthouses have disappeared into the past, and the current one is too small for the volume of business which must be transacted there, so another building has just been completed. The Willmar Police and Sheriff's Departments have a successful working arrangement. The old Carnegie Library has disappeared too, to be replaced by this one, which is also the headquarters for the multi-county Pioneer Library System, and is looking for more room. Some of our schools are no longer schools, while others have changed the ages of the pupils they serve. A new high school is now in its 2nd year of operation, while the Civic Center is a very popular place, particularly with the hockey crowd. There have been changes. Our once large railroad establishment has left us. We are no longer just a Scandinavian town. Our new Hispanic neighbors are changing the face of the community. We've grown to more than 19,000 people, served by nearly 30 churches. Willmar's come a long, long way from that first little store to the vibrant, modern city it is today. Over the years, some very interesting people have called it home, including 8 women who conducted the first strike against a bank on our state's history. Pinky Nelson, the first man in the world to fly free in space. There have been a lot of saints here, and a few sinners too, but we've grown from a single log cabin to this city, which has used its past to build its future.